When people think of the United States Capitol, they think of power. They think of the president giving the State of the Union, or senators arguing on C-SPAN, or tourists taking selfies on the lawn. It's the epicenter of American history. It's supposed to be a place of order, of law. But if you actually work there, especially if you work there at night, you realize something else very quickly. The Capitol isn't just a building, it's a tomb. Think about it. This place wasn't just built on high ideals. It was built on the backs of enslaved laborers who died in the mud pulling those stones. It was used as a massive makeshift hospital during the Civil War, where thousands of soldiers bled out on the floors of the rotunda. Men have been beaten nearly to death with canes on the Senate floor. Congressmen have been shot. There is a concept called historical sedimentation. It's the idea that when enough trauma, enough anger, and enough blood soaks into a physical location, the building itself absorbs it. It acts like a sponge. And eventually, that sponge gets full. And the history starts leaking out. My name is Mark. In the winter of 2026, I was a junior correspondent for a mid-sized political news outlet. I was 28, hungry, and trying to make a name for myself in the DC press corps. I thought the hardest part of the job was going to be dealing with arrogant politicians or making tight deadlines. I was wrong. The hardest part of the job was walking alone through the empty corridors of the House wing at 2 a.m. Because in those halls, I learned that the people who built this country, the people who fought and died in it, haven't all left. And some of them really, really hate the press. This is the story of my last week on Capitol Hill. This is the story of the East Grand Staircase. If you enjoy true encounters and things that go bump in the night, consider subscribing and dropping a like on this video. It helps the channel grow and bring you more nightmares. Now, let's get into it. February in Washington. DC is miserable. The wind comes off the Potomac River and cuts right through your coat. The sky is always a flat, dead gray. I was covering a particularly brutal legislative session. They were debating a massive budget bill, which meant marathon hearings. The kind of hearings that start at 9 a.m. and don't wrap up until well past midnight. As a junior reporter, I got the garbage shifts. The senior correspondents would go home to their warm beds in Georgetown, and I would be left in the press gallery, chugging stale coffee, waiting to catch a quote from some exhausted representative stumbling out of chambers. The Capitol at night is a totally different animal than it is during the day. During the day, it's a circus. Thousands of tourists, school groups in matching neon t-shirts, staffers running around with stacks of paper. It's loud, it's alive. But at night, when the tourists are cleared out and the metal detectors are shut down, it's completely, suffocatingly silent. The architecture is massive. Ceilings that are 30 feet high, floors made of solid marble, walls lined with statues of dead guys staring down at you. When you walk down those hallways alone, your footsteps echo so loudly, it sounds like someone is walking right behind you. You catch yourself looking over your shoulder a lot. I had been working the night shift for about 3 weeks when I started noticing the atmosphere. At first, I just chalked it up to sleep deprivation and too much caffeine. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and you just know two people were just arguing? The air feels heavy, thick. That's what the House wing felt like after 1 a.m., heavy. I started talking to some of the night shift security guards to pass the time. The Capitol Police are a tough group, but the older guys, the ones who had been walking those halls for 20 years, they had stories. One night, I was sitting near the crypt, the basement area right under the rotunda. I was talking to an older guard named Davis. "You don't want to be down here too late, kid," Davis told me, leaning against a pillar. "Gets weird down here." I chuckled. Weird how? Politicians sneaking out? Davis didn't smile. No, the cats. Cats? Like mice catchers? Like the cat, he said. The demon cat. It's a legend around here. Supposedly it prowls the basement. Looks like a normal tabby at first, but if you get close to it, it swells up to the size of a tiger. They say a guard actually shot at it back in 1862. It only shows up right before something terrible happens. They saw it before Lincoln got shot. They saw it before JFK. I laughed out loud. I thought he was hazing the new guy. Okay, sure, I'll keep an eye out for Garfield. Davis just looked at me. Laugh all you want, reporter. But there's a lot of things in this building that don't clock out when the session ends. Just watch your step on the stairs. I didn't think much of it at the time. Every old building has its ghost stories, right? It's part of the charm. It's what sociologists call legend tripping, making up spooky stories to make a boring place feel more exciting. I figured the guards just told those stories to keep themselves awake. But a few nights later, I found out why Davis warned me about the stairs. And I found out that the history of the Capitol isn't just a story. It's a stain that never washed out. To get from the press area to the House chamber, you usually take the East Grand staircase. It's exactly what it sounds like. A massive, sweeping staircase made of white marble and Aquia Creek sandstone. It's beautiful, in a very cold, imposing kind of way. It was a Thursday night, or technically, Friday morning, 2:15 a.m. A committee hearing had just unexpectedly wrapped up, and I needed to get upstairs to the House gallery to file my report. I had my laptop tucked under my arm and my phone in my hand, reading an email. I was exhausted. I was running on fumes. I hit the bottom of the East Grand staircase and started jogging up the steps. I was maybe halfway up when it happened. I didn't trip over my own feet. I didn't slip on a slick spot. I felt something grab my ankle. It wasn't a brush. It wasn't a snag on the carpet. It was a distinct physical grip. It felt like a large, heavy hand clamping down right above my shoe and yanking backward. I pitched forward hard. My laptop flew out of my hands and clattered up the marble stairs. I threw my hands out to catch myself and slammed my palms and knees into the sharp edge of a stone step. Pain shot up my legs. I lay there for a second, gasping, the wind completely knocked out of me. "What the hell?" I hissed. I scrambled around, sitting on the stairs, looking down to see what I had tripped over. I expected to see a loose piece of brass stripping, or maybe a discarded cable from a camera crew. The stairs were completely bare, smooth marble. Nothing. I looked down the staircase. The hallway below was empty. I looked up the staircase. The landing above was empty. There was absolutely no one there. My heart started thumping. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I reached down and touched my ankle. The muscle was actually throbbing. It felt bruised. I slowly stood up, my knees shaking. I gathered up my laptop. The screen was cracked, which was coming out of my paycheck, and I limped the rest of the way up the stairs. When I got to the press gallery, my editor, an older guy named Tom, was packing up his briefcase. He saw me limping in, pale and sweating. "You look like garbage, Mark," Tom said. "What happened?" "I fell on the east staircase," I said, rubbing my knee. "I swear to God it felt like someone grabbed my leg." Tom stopped packing his briefcase. He looked at me. His expression changed from irritated to something else. Something like pity. "The East Grand staircase?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, near the bottom." Tom sighed. He walked over to the mini fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and tossed it to me. "Sit down, kid," he said. "Let me give you a quick history lesson. You know who William Talby is?" I shook my head. "Never heard of him." He was a congressman from Kentucky back in the 1880s, Tom said, leaning against his desk. Big guy, charismatic, powerful, but he had a secret. He was having an affair. Tom explained that back in 1887, a journalist named Charles Kincaid, who worked for the Louisville Times, found out about the affair and wrote a massive expose. The headline basically called Talby out for being caught in flagrante. The article ruined Talby, Tom said, destroyed his career. He didn't run for re-election. He became a lobbyist, which meant he was still roaming these halls every day. And he was furious. According to the history books, Talby and Kincaid crossed paths in the Capitol all the time. And Talby, who was massive, started physically bullying the reporter. "I'm not talking about mean words," Tom said. He would grab Kincaid by the collar. He would yank his ears. One time, in an elevator, Talby stomped his heel down on Kincaid's foot and held him there while the guy screamed in pain. He threatened to cut his throat. It was a campaign of terror. And it finally boiled over in February of 1890. Right around this time of year, Tom noted. Kincaid couldn't take the abuse anymore. He went home, got a pistol, and came back to the Capitol. Kincaid was walking down the East Grand Staircase, Tom said, pointing a finger at me. Talby was walking up. Kincaid pulled the gun and shot the former congressman point blank in the face. I felt a chill run down my spine. He killed him on the stairs? Talby fell backward, Tom said softly. He bled out all over those marble steps. The blood soaked into the porous sandstone. If you look closely near the bottom of the staircase during the day, you can still see the dark, rusty stains baked into the stone. I swallowed hard. I had just fallen right where a man had been murdered. Talby didn't die right away, Tom continued. He suffered in a hospital for 11 days before he died. Kincaid went to trial, claimed self-defense because of the bullying, and got acquitted, walked away scot-free. I looked at my bruised ankle. Okay, so it's a spooky history story. What does that have to do with me tripping? Tom looked at me dead in the eye. In parapsychology, there are two types of hauntings, Tom said. There's residual, like a tape recording playing on a loop. A ghost just walks the same path, not interacting with anyone. It's called the stone tape theory. The idea that the marble absorbed the trauma of the murder. And the other type? I asked. Intelligent, Tom said. A ghost that knows where it is. A ghost that reacts. A ghost that holds a grudge. Tom leaned in closer. Talby hated journalists. A journalist ruined his life. A journalist shot him in the face. And ever since 1890, reporters, specifically members of the press corps, have reported being shoved, tripped, and harassed when they walk up those stairs. I stared at him. "You're a journalist, Mark," Tom said quietly. "You didn't trip. He tripped you." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell Tom he was crazy, but my ankle was still throbbing with the distinct imprint of a hand. I didn't sleep that night. For the next few days, I was a nervous wreck. Adults have this thing psychologists call the curse of knowledge. We are so conditioned by society to believe in science and logic that when something impossible happens, our brains immediately try to rationalize it. It was a muscle spasm, I told myself. It was static electricity. It was vertigo. But I started avoiding the East Grand Staircase. If I had to go to the house chamber, I would walk 5 minutes out of my way to use a different stairwell. I also started doing research. I dug into the archives. I found a guy named Richard Livingston. He runs Ghost City tours in DC. He's a veteran investigator. I emailed him, off the record, asking about the Talby ghost. He replied within an hour. "Talby is highly active," Livingston wrote, "and highly discriminatory. He doesn't bother the tourists. He doesn't bother the cleaning staff. He only targets the press. It's a textbook intelligent spatial haunting. The bloodstains act as an anchor. Be careful." Livingston also told me something fascinating about the tours he runs. He said that adults usually dismiss the ghost stories. But children? Kids who go on the tours are incredibly receptive to the energy. Psychologists call it transliminality, or having thin mental boundaries. Children haven't built up the rigid walls of skepticism yet. They don't automatically filter out the impossible. Livingston said kids will frequently point to the stairs and say they see a large, angry man standing there, even before the tour guide tells the story. Because they aren't trying to rationalize it, they just see it. I wished I had thick mental boundaries. But after my fall, my boundaries were shattered. I felt like I was hyper-aware of every shadow in that building. The climax happened exactly 1 week after my first fall. Thursday night. It was 3 a.m. I was the last reporter in the gallery. I had finally finished my piece on the budget bill, hit send to my editor, and packed up my bag. I just wanted to get to the metro and go home to my apartment. I walked out of the press area and into the main corridor. The lights in the hallway were flickering. Not like a horror movie strobe light, just a faint, inconsistent buzzing. The power grid in the Capitol is old. It happens. But the temperature, it had plummeted. It's an old building, it gets drafty. But this wasn't a draft. This was like walking into a meat freezer. I could literally see my breath puffing out in small white clouds. I pulled my coat tighter around me. To get to the exit I needed, the fastest route was down the East Grand Staircase. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down into the gloom. The bottom of the staircase was wrapped in shadows. "Don't be an idiot, Mark," I told myself. "It's a staircase. Just walk down it." I gripped the wooden banister tightly. My knuckles were white. I started descending. I was halfway down. I could see the dark, rust-colored stains on the marble near the bottom landing. Talby's blood. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a footstep. It wasn't the wind. It was a heavy, wet, wheezing sound. The sound of a man trying to breathe through a throat full of liquid. It was coming from right behind me. I froze. My entire body locked up. The hair on my arm stood straight up. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in my DNA was screaming at me to run down the stairs and not look back. But I couldn't move. The wheezing got closer. It sounded like it was right next to my ear. Then, I smelled it. Copper. The thick, metallic, sickening smell of fresh blood. It was so strong I almost gagged. And then, a voice. It wasn't a whisper. It was a low, guttural, furious growl right over my shoulder. Filth. Before I could even process the word, I felt a massive, invisible weight slam into my back. It wasn't a trip this time. It was a full-body shove. It felt like a linebacker had hit me between the shoulder blades. I was thrown forward, entirely airborne. I tumbled down the remaining dozen marble steps. I hit the stone hard, rolling, my shoulders smashing against the edge of a step, my head bouncing off the floor of the bottom landing. I lay there on the cold marble, completely dazed. My vision was swimming. My shoulder was screaming in agony. I think I had dislocated it. I groaned, rolling onto my back, clutching my shoulder. I looked up the staircase. Standing at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the dim emergency lights of the hallway, was a figure. It was a man. He was massive, tall, broad-shouldered, but he wasn't solid. He looked fuzzy, like static on an old television set. He was wearing a long, dark coat, typical of the late 1800s. And he was looking down at me. I couldn't see his face clearly. The lower half of his face looked wrong. It looked dark, mangled, like a shadow was eating away at his jaw, where Kincaid had shot him. He stood there for maybe 3 seconds. We just stared at each other, the living journalist and the dead politician. And I swear to God, I felt pure, unadulterated hatred radiating off of him. It was a heavy, suffocating anger that had been trapped in that building for 130 years. Then, the figure simply dissolved. He didn't fade away. He just collapsed into the darkness. Like mist hitting a hot pavement. The oppressive cold instantly lifted. The smell of copper vanished. I was alone again on the floor of the Capitol. A security guard found me about 10 minutes later. I told him I tripped. I told him I was just clumsy and lost my footing. What was I going to say? A 130-year-old ghost shoved me down the stairs because I work for a newspaper? They would have pulled my press credentials and sent me to a psych ward. The guard helped me up. He looked at the stairs. He looked at the rust stains on the marble. He didn't say anything, but the look he gave me, he knew. I went to the ER. Mild concussion, separated shoulder. I took a week off work to recover. During that week, sitting in my apartment with my arm in a sling, I did a lot of thinking. I thought about monumental time. It's a concept that says some memories are so violent, so intense, that they escape the normal flow of history. They become permanent fixtures in the present. The U.S. Capitol isn't just a building where laws are made. It's an infrastructure of enchantment. It is a physical hard drive that has recorded every ounce of pain, anger, and violence that has happened within its walls. The enslaved builders in the basement, the dying soldiers in the rotunda, the demon cat prowling the crypts, and William Preston Talby pacing the East Grand Staircase, waiting to exact revenge on any member of the press arrogant enough to walk in his territory. When you engage in legend tripping, when you go on those ghost tours to get a cheap thrill, you are playing with something you don't understand. You are stepping into a Foucauldian space, a place haunted by the violence of the past. For tourists, it's a spooky story. For me, it was a separated shoulder and a realization that I was working in a graveyard. I didn't go back. I emailed my resignation to Tom the next week. I told him the hours were too brutal and I was moving back to my hometown to work in local news. Tom replied with a one-line email. "I understand, Mark. Stay off the stairs." I haven't been back to Washington, D.C. since. I write puff pieces now. Local city council meetings, high school sports. It's boring and it doesn't pay well. But the buildings I work in are new, and they don't have bloodstains baked into the floorboards. The haunting of the U.S. Capitol is one of the most rigorously documented parapsychological phenomena in the country. It is a perfect, terrifying example of an intelligent haunting anchored by historical trauma. We like to think that when we die, we move on. But cases like Congressman Talby suggest something darker. They suggest that if you die with enough anger in your heart, you don't move on. You just stay right where you fell, waiting for someone to blame. If you ever visit Washington, D.C., if you ever take a tour of the Capitol building, take a look at the East Grand Staircase on the house side. Look near the bottom steps for the dark stains in the marble. You can take a picture. You can marvel at the history. But if you are a journalist, a blogger, or a reporter, do yourself a favor. Take the elevator. If you have a story about a historical haunting, a haunted workplace, or an encounter you can't explain, send it to the email in the description below. Stay safe, and as always, thanks for watching.